Well, welcome to another edition of Willow World. I'm Joshua Ridley, the CEO and co-founder of Willow. 2020, what a year like no other. Our lives have changed. Our world has changed. The built world has changed. What is it like to lead a company in this unprecedented season? How do we respond to the challenges of our time? And what can history teach us? Over the coming months, I'll be sharing with you some conversations and insights that I've had with some of the leaders of the built world. From Toronto to New York City to London to Sydney and other places around our amazing planet. Well, this month, I caught up with Michael Turner, the president of Oxford Properties, a Canadian multinational corporation with operations in real estate, investment, development and property management. In our conversation, we discussed how Oxford is managing through these challenging times. Michael shared some great insights on how technology is playing a critical role in the present and in the future of Oxford. He also shared his thoughts around the broader real estate industry. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Michael, thank you for joining me today, very early in the morning for you and it's after hours for me, but so good to connect with you over a call and a conversation. Really enjoyed our journey with you so far. It's been a young journey, but so much ahead of us together in terms of looking at how we can work in this new age of technology and the challenges that I think 2020 we wouldn't have foreseen have brought upon us. What's it been like for you in this season as the leader of Oxford? As you've dealt with, something that perhaps you didn't get training in business school for, as you think about 2020?
Lots of lessons in this one, my friend. I think the most difficult period for us was the period where the WHO had pronounced there's a global pandemic, and before local governments reacted and gave any guidelines, rules, etc. So we made up our protocols for closing and managing in that period as best as we were able. But that was fairly difficult. And the difficulty was, we're asking staff to show up and continue to work, but they would go home and they'd, turn on the news, and the news was very negative and full of risks and downside. And so that was a difficult period in terms of the employee experience and managing our customers and their fears and so on and so forth. And so at some point, Josh, you get past the fear and you can start to move forward again with some degree of caution. I wouldn't call it confidence a few months ago, but removing fear was a big obstacle to overcome.
When you say fear, is that more for your tenants, or was it for both the tenants and your own people is confronting the unknown? Was it a combination?
It was all of the above. It was, are my employees at risk because they're going to work? What do we do when we have a known COVID case in a building? If it happened to you or me, we have an obligation to respect your individual privacy and your identity. And at the same time, we need to notify other occupants that there's been a COVID incident in a building. How do we do that? How do we notify local health authorities? Were there local authorities and protocols and means of connecting with, the appropriate parties? All of these things that seem sensible now, there were no sensibilities around how you're supposed to operate in that environment some months ago. And, if I put on my commercial hat, and that wasn't our primary modus operandi, but as an owner, we have contractual obligations to keep our assets open. We didn't want to lock anything up and have people later make claims against us that we made their space inaccessible in contradiction to the terms of our agreements.
Now we're coming into this next phase. What are your thoughts in terms of leadership and confidence, just showing us people and I suppose your tenants in moving forward? Is that part of why you wanted to go back to the office, other than the productivity, I suppose, of the children and so on? But is that one of the things you're looking to do, is just demonstrate by your actions?
Yeah, it's a few fold. One is I think it would be appropriate for me to walk the talk, if you will, when we're asking our own employees who run critical infrastructure to continue to show up to work. They haven't, so many of our employees have not sheltered in place. So I think it's appropriate for me to demonstrate that I'm prepared to do what they've done. And you're absolutely right. It's odd that we're having to normalize going into the office and going back to work. And when you do it, it actually feels pretty good. So if I can be an example to others and show that I feel safe when I go back to my office and help to rebuild confidence for our occupants, that's a role that I think that we can play and contribute to. And we have shared collateral, all of our protocols with all of our occupants, and done our best to educate people so that they can manage their premises, in our overall office buildings or in our shopping centers or wherever the case may be. You might have heard me share this before, Josh. This is different than a typical earnings recession or a balance sheet recession. No amount of money printing from the central bank is going to change the psychology of you or me or others around, do they feel safe? And so it's incumbent upon industry to put into place the protocols and practices so that we can take this risk of COVID, which is all encompassing and consuming the airwaves and our psychology, and move it over time from an existential risk to something that is much more in the background.
Yes.
And it's different. And history doesn't repeat itself, but they often say history rhymes. And I think there are parallels between, if I reach to an example in history, 9/11 in New York, in that time period, no one was ever going to go into a tall building again. No one was ever going to go to downtown Manhattan again. You've been flying for many, many years for your role, as have I. And I remember there was a period of time where I was hesitating for some period do I want to get back on an airplane? What might be going on here in terms of bad actors trying to, change this experience and my destiny? And we put into place, government and the private sector, a whole series of protocols to manage that risk. And that risk at the time was terrorism, and turn it from something that was all consuming to a residual risk. And over time, we were able to get back on with it and get on with life. I think that will happen with COVID, and we're not there yet. So the private sector has a responsibility to demonstrate good behaviors, good practices, and help rebuild confidence in ways that central banks aren't going to be able to.
Yeah, and that's a really great way to lead out. And I think the parallel with New York City and 9/11, in fact, the globe with 9/11 is a very good one. And, downtown New York, as we both know, is just such a vibrant place nowadays. And the work that you're doing there at 550, of course, will be a great development. Just why are you moving to Industry 4.0, Michael? And do you see, if there is a silver lining through this season, do you see something in that with respect to technology?
So I'll answer the first part of the question with, just a belief, Josh, that you have to be aspirational. And I'm not a technologist, you're a technologist. So as a non-technologist, I think I've just observed how technology has transformed virtually every industry in the world. Real estate and construction has amongst the lowest productivity gains over many, many decades. And technology has started to show up in our industry, both in disrupting traditional forms of real estate as well as enabling us to reimagine our ways of working. So I want to put out an aspirational opportunity and vision for my teams, and my employees similarly are very much trying themselves to articulate a new way of doing things, and they're embracing ideas like 4.0 with a lot of enthusiasm. The second part of your question was about, is there a silver lining? So there's absolutely been a number of silver linings. And I talked to you a little bit at the beginning of our conversation around the time period between when there was a pronouncement of a global pandemic and when local governments provided any specific guidelines as to what new rules were in their neighborhood. So we found over a short period of time, and we had to start tracking this globally, over 150 different edicts from governments around the world impacted our business. And I don't mean that from a health and safety standpoint. I mean it from things like you're not allowed to charge your occupants for any contractual rent escalations, deferring property tax deliverable dates, notwithstanding the fact that many of them are set at specific times in a year within a municipality. Municipalities were delaying those. All kinds of notices were impacting us. And at the same time, we were flooded with over 2,225 requests for some form of relief from our occupants. And this was happening in real time all around the world. And you know a lot about technology, so you know how inflexible accounting ERP systems are. We had to manage all of this on the fly. And our teams were able to stand up data infrastructure and put in place a tracking system to monitor all of the actions of government, all of the requests from tenants, all of the correspondence from ourselves to our occupants, from a legal standpoint, from any conversations we had, from an accounting standpoint, and even cash. Real estate companies traditionally aren't great at managing their cash. You know, we sort of look at our cash and our monthly balances. We had to be monitoring our cash on a daily basis because it was changing so quickly. And so what I just described to you, our teams were able to stand up something that was very viable. It wasn't perfect, but it allowed us to sail through the storm, and they did it in a matter of about 10 days. Before that, I might have had people who still didn't necessarily embrace a vision around 4.0 or still wanted to operate in little islands in isolation instead of being part of a connected network. And so that experience has really transformed the belief of anybody who was on the right-hand tail of adoption, if you will. We don't have anybody in that domain now. Everybody is a big believer and a big embracer of this idea of go to 4.0.
That's awesome, Michael, and well done. And I feel like the move to bringing in Dean Hopkins in the COO role, who's come from that digital background, of course, was another big move in that direction in terms of making that digital role an operations role and operations role a digital role. So not dividing the two, as we talked about a number of times. Willow is all about digital twins, and we've been talking about this for a little while, but we've got a couple of new buildings that we're working with you on, the Stack over in Vancouver and the Hub in Toronto, and then now more recently down in New York, of course, the 550 Washington project. And part of that promise, I suppose, at the building level is to look at how we can bring in the spatial, the static and the live data into one interface. What's your hopes and dreams, I suppose, having come from the world of paper and spreadsheets for Oxford with respect to digital twin technology, Michael? What's your vision there in terms of 4.0?
Some of it is solving a problem and creating the critical building blocks for new opportunities. So I'll start with the problem first. So the problem for us is we need to double the size of our organization over the next 5 years. And that means we will have the same amount of growth in 5 years as we've had in the previous 60. And we're getting more complicated. We operate out of 9 different countries now. We're on 4 continents and 2 hemispheres. And that creates a more complex organization in terms of processes, in terms of dealing with jurisdictional issues, in terms of just having a good understanding of your assets when your footprint is distributed.
Yes.
So the opportunity is to allow us, or the aspiration for us is to figure out, are we able to double our size without having to double the size of our workforce? Ideally, we'd like to keep it the same. And can we do that without sacrificing knowledge, information, sources of truth, etc.? And there's no doubt that we can do that and better with technology and accomplish things through the cloud and through platforms like your own, outcomes that would not have been possible only a few years ago. So that's one part of solve a problem. The other part, which is perhaps a little more aspirational, is as we build critical building blocks digitally, it's just going to enable us to have a much richer relationship with our customer and be able to not just improve the occupier experience, but have a forum and a platform for which we can deliver services and generate outcomes for that occupant. And I know the industry has had a lot of experiments with, various apps on your phone, and no disrespect to a lot of those initiatives. I think more of them than not, unfortunately, have been gimmicks. And until we have the critical infrastructure in place, they're not going to be enabled to be very powerful in terms of changing the occupier experience. And so that's another aspirational opportunity that we have in working with teams like yourself.
Yes.
So there's a lot in that answer, Josh, about what we hope to do and what we're looking to solve for.
Well, I do feel there's some fundamental progress that we've already made, Michael, with respect to the way in which you've gone about this, looking at a centralised approach, trying to look at a rollout plan, include both the new and the existing as one platform, not two different silos. And as you've really pointed out well there, not looking at just another point solution. It's one of my observations of the crisis, Michael, has been quite a lot of well-meaning businesses wanting to sort of solve a problem, and it might be access, or it might be occupancy, or it could be another whole range of different issues. But then it goes back into that issue as you just describe, another point solution. Have you got any questions for me that you'd like to ask at all from your other end of the world there? I've been asking lots of questions of you.
Yeah, sure I do. So, you asked me about some of the things that I saw and experienced through the crisis. So maybe you could share with me as the non-techie on the call, tell me about some of the trends that you've noticed in technology, over the last period. Have you seen any changes in the last 5 or 6 months?
Yeah, Michael, I've seen your peers around the world really look at, and I've got to give them a great amount of appreciation, admiration actually, for the way in which your peers and groups such as Investor, who you work very closely with here in this country, the very on the front foot approach they've taken to the crisis, right down to the physical distancing and so on the medical side. From a technology side, it's really opened up. The conversation's opened up. I do feel that there is a much more, if this pandemic continues, if we have another second wave we're talking about at the moment here in Australia, or if this stays around for a lot longer period, well, what do we do? How do we solve this in a new way? How can we look at, as you point out, look at spaces and making them safe, and how can technology drive that? So I suppose one of the trends I've seen is to look at this in a more holistic manner, and the conversations we're having are very encouraging with customers and potential customers on that basis. We have noticed, as I pointed out earlier, a lot of businesses looking at point solutions. So as I said, access has been a big consideration, or looking at occupancy to sort of look at how the social distancing issues can be enforced, and even the air quality side of things. I do sense that there's a need to make sure that all of those solutions aren't just put in on a hodgepodge basis, on a building by building basis, but it's an opportunity to look at your portfolio as a transformational moment, and then look at those technologies as something that you can continually grow on to find best in class, and not lock yourself in on one or 2 point solutions. So it's been an interesting season. I do think that for businesses like ourselves, we've also had to recognise that, as you pointed out, you've had some just enormous challenges to deal with, and we're very focused then on how can we help you be ready for your next challenge by preparing in advance. So we felt that was a good trend from this season.
And Josh, what would you share as, what are some of the benefits of a twin for somebody, that's overseeing a portfolio? What would we be able to do with a twin that we wouldn't be able to do in its absence?
Yeah, look, I like to say there's 3 key areas that we focus on with our customers, and I'll answer that in a couple of ways. Firstly, how can we make sure that by engaging and utilising the digital twin, the Willow digital twin, you are able to make more money, save money through being able to be more efficient, and thirdly, and really importantly, not have the risk of losing it through lack of compliance or other things like risk, and even things such as cyber. So with the digital twin in new construction, for example, on the stack and the hub, which we're working with you on, today, it's still quite a manual process. The whole commissioning and handover of a building typically is done still quite manually. So no matter whether you've got your architects and engineers and construction companies working with great companies like Procore or 3D drawing information in a BIM model, it's still quite an arduous process through bringing all that information together and pushing it through into your operations and asset management teams. With Willow, that all goes away because you've got now a platform that ingests all that information, and that very important asset register that often gets forgotten becomes the code for your warranties, being able to track warranties on all your assets, for example, looking at the things such as compliance, making sure that compliance is met. So by bringing all this information together, you're able to then save money by handing over and commissioning process. You're able to also then look at that compliance issue by being ahead of the curve on issues of risk and compliance. And then lastly, being able to solve problems. So for your maintenance and operations team, not just on one building, but across a portfolio. So Willow is able to do that with new construction projects as well as existing buildings. What we're very excited about launching with yourselves and other like-minded businesses such as Brookfield and Microsoft is a marketplace that allows those point solutions to sit and feed off the data that comes from the spatial, the static for your asset registers, and then all of your live data systems. So you're able to utilize something like might save you energy on one building, and then you might be able to transfer that across the portfolio and not just be locked into that third-party application, but like your phone, you're able to upgrade and quickly find a new application that might then be able to be relevant to your portfolio.
Right. So let's just stay on that. That's one that's on the theme of the experiential. So how is an experience different for an occupant in a truly smart environment and smart building as compared to one that is analog?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, first of all, I'll use one of the assets that you are involved in some capacity for your investor, 60 Martin Place. The occupants are able to use their phone to enter the building to start with, and that's not new technology. That's pretty recent for an office building, but it's not brand new technology. But what's very important about that, though, is that you can then get into your space. You can send a tenant services request from a space, from a floor. It can go to the right person. It's then immediately responded to by the manager, and your experience from an occupant's perspective is much more seamless. It's much more interactive with the manager of the asset, more like a hotel experience, a Four Seasons hotel experience, rather than a typical sort of, I don't even know who the manager is of my building
So from an occupancy perspective, it's a much more interactive, easy to use and experiential methodology to be able to work in a space and to interface with a building.
And Josh, maybe think about the art of the possible and the technology innovations that Willow is working on, and those that you're seeing in, as you describe them, the point solutions that you aspirationally are including as part of your marketplace and your platform. What is possible in 5 years from now? I'm not going to say 10 years because that's too long. 5 years from now, yes. What are we going to see and what are we going to be able to do that's profoundly different than today?
Well, I have managers say to me, Michael, senior managers out of large real estate companies, saying I have zero information at a quality that helps me make good decisions across my portfolio. So my hope is that one day, every bit of information that you need and your people need to make good decisions is available to you. So I would like to see Oxford, for example, with your growing portfolio of global assets, you're able to manage your tenants in a much more meaningful way. So you can see everything you need to do to make a good decision. The data that's coming from occupancy overlaid with the data that's coming from, the experience applications, the news, the tweets, all coming through so that you can make a good decision. I'd also like to be able to say that you can sell your assets for a higher price based on the fact that you've got all that history, all that maintenance data from the entire life of the building. You've actually got all the warranties all there. You've got everything that's needed in that DD room right at your fingertips, and you're able to give to the regulators in issues such as crises like we've been through immediate information rather than information that's months after the date. And I see that not too far away, Michael. I also see the possible, I was speaking to somebody just today actually about blockchain technology and looking at how we can get contracts working between your various equipment suppliers and working on the basis of uptime or the kind of outputs that you want to see, so that once we've brought this data together, you're able to do so much more than what you thought before. So from a risk perspective, you're reducing your risk across a range of areas. You're increasing your customer service. So for you as a business, it's a better outcome in terms of revenue. And then from a maintenance and an operations perspective, you've centralized that and it's much more efficient. So those are the three areas I'd see rather than getting into the grandiose. But I think if we could pull that off, I think that'd be an enormous achievement given where we are today.
Well, I love your pillars of manage risk, save money, make money. Those all, you can see they make me smile. So thanks for sharing those.
Thank you. All right. Well, that's been great to chat with you, Michael. Should we close out the formal proceedings now?
My day's just getting started,
right.
And it was nice to chat to you.
Nice to chat to you too, and have a wonderful day. Enjoy your bike ride into work. I'm inspired.
The home office day today. I'm here.
Okay.
But I'll go in another time. Yeah, that's what I need to do. Exactly.
All right. Thanks, Michael.
All right, Josh.
Thank you very much.
Soon. Bye now.
Well, I hope you found that as great as I did. I'm certainly inspired from leaders such as Michael on this challenging time and how best to respond to this unprecedented season. We're honoured at Willow to be working with Oxford. Thank you for joining us for this edition of Willow World, and I look forward to bringing more conversations with other visionaries of the built world, such as Michael, in the coming months. If you'd like to stay up to date with Willow, don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn or drop us a line through our website for more details. Take care, and don't forget to wash your hands.